Hey there, welcome. Almost dropped the camera right off the bat. So, how's everybody doing tonight? I know we had Passover last night. Now we're coming up on Easter when everybody's thoughts turn to bunnies. Usually they would be of the egg-laying or chocolate variety. But in my case, I keep thinking that these days our troubles are multiplying like rabbits. I know I'm not the only one. I have a lot of friends who are struggling right now. And anybody else out there starting to get really angsty about their finances? Yeah. So I wrote this story long ago, probably 1999. It's called Rabbit's Humbling Experience, and I believe that it is just as appropriate right now in the middle of this hot mess of as it was when I wrote it. So it's Rabbit's Humbling Experience. Money is often a good thing to have. It's not necessary to have it in great piles, cluttering up the place and attracting thieves, mind you, but a bit of it here and there can be extremely comforting indeed. Now, Rabbit, he knew this well because, well, he didn't have any. Not that Rabbit wasn't a hard worker. I mean, he worked long hours to support himself, his wife, and his 4 little bunnies. No, the problem was that money just didn't go as far as it used to, and having a burrow full of little ones to care for seemed to make it vanish faster than ever. Now, little Pansy needed braces for her teeth, and Kip, he needed a winter coat, and, well, all of them could do with new shoes at least once a year, if possible. And life just seemed to pepper this little brood with challenges like leaky pipes that cost an ear and a whisker to repair. Last year, the whole carrot crop failed completely due to drought. While they weren't as poor as church mice, they were barely keeping body and soul together these days. Now, the problem was not just a lack of money, but a lack of faith that Rabbit had in others and, well, frankly, in himself. Whenever there was a problem with finances, Rabbit would try to solve it all by himself. Now, he tried to make sure that Mrs. Rabbit never saw how much strain he was under or how poor they really were. "She is my love, my all," he fretted to himself. "She must never ever know how I have failed her and the children." It was the same in all that he undertook, though. I mean, at work, he refused to give more than a tiny problem to his underlings to solve, so he was just constantly buried in work. Projects from his department were always finished just under the wire because, well, he was the one doing most of the work all by himself. After a while, he and his coworkers, they all began to feel like he just didn't trust them to do a good job, and many of them left and they went to other companies. "Just a pack of unreliables," he told his boss when he was asked why he was running late again. "Now, if you want something done right, you got to do it yourself." The truth of the matter was that Mr. Rabbit was afraid to let go of so much as a crumb of responsibility because he was afraid that people would think that he wasn't a hard worker. Worse, what if another rabbit could do a better job than he did? He might be out of a job. That was true that he could have asked his younger brother for help, but he would never allow himself to be diminished in his brother's eyes. He was the eldest of 7. He should be most successful of them all, and besides, his brother would likely demand every detail of how he failed, and he just couldn't bear to tell it. All this Rabbit carried around inside of him like a stone weighing down his heart. And today was the day that that stone would nearly crush him. He'd come home as usual, but tonight the burrow was dark as pitch. Fearing the worst, he hurried inside to find his family eaten by candlelight. "What's all of this?" he said to his wife. Oh, Mrs. Rabbit, she was a very nervous bunny at that moment, for she had to tell her husband that their electric services had been cut off. She knew it was her fault for not paying the charges on time, but some months back she had discovered that their bank account was nearly empty. Now, being afraid that her husband might think that she'd spent too much money on things the family needed, she chose not to speak to him about the problem. Instead, she took in washing and baked bread, made jams to sell at the farm market. Mrs. Rabbit had hidden the bills and paid them whenever she could. She scrimped and she saved. She did more odd jobs, but she refused to ask anyone for help because that would be humiliating. "How on earth could you have let these bills go for so long without payment?" Mr. Rabbit demanded as he pounded his fist on the table. Mrs. Rabbit went cold with dread. "Well, we just couldn't, we didn't have the money," she said with air. "It was out now. We needed the water and the carrot seeds, and I made jams and bread to sell, and I thought I could sell enough jams this month to pay for it all, but that big storm forced them to close the farm market for over a week." Mr. Rabbit paced and he fretted. Oh, he was so embarrassed that his wife had known of their finances and had never said a word, and he was angry that she'd taken it upon herself to earn that money, and he was very angry because he felt she had deceived him. His anger passed into a deep feeling of depression, of failure. For the first time in his life, he's going to have to admit defeat. I'm so sorry, my love," he said, and a great tear rolled down his furry cheek. "I failed you miserably. I suppose you're going to leave me now, and I wouldn't blame you." Mrs. Rabbit had been prepared for the worst. She'd been ready for him to rant and to rave or to walk out and leave her for being so incompetent, but never had she imagined that she was going to hear these words. She had never seen her husband cry. She just froze right there in place. Misunderstanding her lack of response, Mr. Rabbit rose and slowly began to gather his things to leave. Better to go than to be tossed out, he thought. She would surely find a better rabbit to provide for her and the children. Realizing that her husband was about to do, snapped Mrs. Rabbit into action. "I'm sorry," she cried. "Oh, I'm so sorry that I disappointed you. Please don't leave me. I love you with all my heart." Love him? Why, he'd failed. How could she possibly love him? But I failed you, he managed. I should go and let you start again with a more worthy partner. Mrs. Rabbit went to him and she put her arms around him as if he were one of her small bunnies, and she stroked his head and she murmured soothing words. And then she began to laugh, and she laughed and laughed and laughed until tears were rolling down her cheeks. She said, "Wow, we are quite a pair, aren't we?" She finally gasped out. We both so busy being unworthy and afraid that we didn't even share the burden." Mr. Rabbit was listening, but he still wasn't sure that he saw her point. "Oh, that's all well and good, but it doesn't get the lights turned on or the water flowing into the pipes," he said. Though it nearly killed him to say it out loud, he asked, "Well, what are we going to do?" Mrs. Rabbit drew a deep breath. "We're going to borrow the money," she said. "Never," he exploded, "never in my life have I asked anyone for anything, and I'm not going to start now." Eyeing him carefully, she made her choice. "No, you won't do the asking. I will," she said, and she held up a paw as if to ward off his response. "Humble is better than frightened in my book. I have been living in a state of pure terror for months now, and just the thought of getting help, well, that just suddenly Oh, it lifted the weight of the world off of me. Mr. Rabbit looked at his wife. How had he failed to see how strong she was? How had he missed such an obvious solution? He put his arms around his wife and he looked into her eyes. No, you will not ask, he said. Before she could dispute him, he added, we will go together. We will share the load. We will go to my brother and we're going to ask him for a loan. Then I will tell my employer that I need a raise, and if he will not give me one, then I'm going to take a second job or a third, he added. There are going to be some changes around here. This family is no longer suffering in silence. We will share the worries as partners, and when we become too great for just the two of us, well, we're just going to have to share them again with our family and with our friends. That's just going to be the way it is from now on. So their troubles passed. And in time, they made their way in the world. It was not the last time that this little family would have to accept aid from friends or relatives, but it was the last time that they would hate themselves for being in need. When their fortunes increased, it did not come through fear or deceit, but by learning to be trusting and humble. They would never forget their hardships. When at last the day came that they could help others, they gave freely and without question. They had learned that for many, it was harder to receive than to give. And we're going to end with a story that came to me as a reminder of our little mini chuckle patch here from the New Leaf. It's called The Inchworm. Note the similarity of the flowers. It's a short one because I am not going to cough through this one. No, sir, not tonight. In all the fields and fields of summer flowers, there was no smaller creature than Allie Inchworm. Stretched out on the petal of a new daisy, the slim, bright green creature looked like a snip of thread or a line drawn by a child with a colored pencil. While most creatures would have thought that being so tiny was a bad thing, Allie knew better. Allie knew because the flowers themselves had told her so. "Dance for us, Allie," they called to her. "Dance, dance your special dance for us." While all the other inchworms in the world spent their days measuring the flowers, Allie had chosen a different pastime. When the wind hummed through the trees and the birds sang, the little being was just filled up with joy that she couldn't help but move with the rhythm. Because all the other inchworms were, quite frankly, tone deaf, they could not appreciate the music that Allie could feel and hear. Allie had invented the two-step. Step together, step. Step together, shimmy. Step together, step. Step together, bounce. The flowers loved every second of it. It just tickled them to see this little green worm so carefree and joyous instead of being serious like all the other inchworms they had met. "Ugh, Allie, for goodness sake," cried Knit, the worm ruler. "You are ruining our work. You're giving inchworms everywhere a bad name with your silly behavior. Just go away, go away, go away, and let us do something that really matters." Now this hurt Allie's feelings pretty badly. She didn't think her dance was silly. Hearing the music and doing her dance, that was a very special thing for her. Allie felt so sad and hurt, she just stopped dancing. And with a little sniffle and a little sigh, she inched her way down the stem and onto the dirt. And she curled up there like a little green coil of a fairy rope. She snuggled under a blanket of dirt and fell asleep. Allie woke with a start when she heard dozens of voices shouting and calling above her. She uncoiled, shook off the dirt, and looked up to see where those voices were coming from. She saw dark shadows racing over the flowers, and the flowers all shook. She inched her way back up the daisy stem as fast as she could and could hardly believe the sight that met her eyes. Dozens of larks had descended on the flowers and were quickly snapping up the inchworms in their beaks. "What shall I do?" she said. I need help. Somebody please help. Help, help. Seemingly in answer to her prayers, the wind came and began to hum through the trees. Hearing the sound, the meadow larks, so happy about having such a large breakfast laid out at their feet, began to sing. "Dance, Allie," hummed the wind. "Believe in yourself. All's going to be just fine." Allie looked in terror at the dozens of birds that could turn and eat her if they spied her. And then she thought about all of the other worms that were in danger. So she closed her eyes and she listened to the music. Allie forgot her fear and she began to dance. One by one, the birds turned to watch her. They were spellbound by this tiny, brave creature that would stand before them and face her greatest fear to save others. The word spread all across the flowers, from bird to bird, and soon all the larks stopped feeding. The largest of the larks flew across the meadow and stood right in front of Allie. He watched her little dance. And he felt the gentle sway of the flowers. The wind stopped. The singers ended their song. Allie opened her eyes to see the giant bird standing right above her. Please," she said, "don't eat us." The bird bowed to her. "Never would I eat one so precious as you, tiny dancer. You have shown what your kind can do, something more than calculate. You can bring peace and joy." Allie bowed to the bird. "Thank you for sparing us today," she said. The bird turned and said in a very large voice for all the birds to hear, "From this day on, we will not eat inchworms. For while this one is rare, she may not be the last of her kind." And as one, the birds rose from the flowers and flew off. The other worms who had survived the attack all made their way to Allie to thank her. Knit came up and said, "I was wrong. You were less wrong. What you do is important. Perhaps when the day's measuring is done, you could teach us how to hear the music we've been missing." Allie smiled. "You can count on me." And so they did. I hope that your days get better, that even though we're all nervous bunnies, we count on each other, and we remember to listen to the good things in life. Thank you. Thank you, everybody who was there for us today when my son was hospitalized, and for all of your prayers and good wishes. I counted on you, and I'm going to make sure you can always count on me to be here for you. Good night.